An e-commerce company has developed an API that is hosted on Amazon ECS, Elastic Container Service. Variable traffic spikes on the application are causing order processing to take too long. The application processes orders using Amazon SQS queue. The approximate number of messages visible metric spikes at very high values throughout the day, which triggers the CloudWatch alarm. Other ECS metrics for the API containers are well within limits. As a developer associate, which of the following will you recommend for improving performance while keeping costs low? A, use backlog per instance metric with target tracking scaling policy. B, use ECS step scaling policy. C, use Docker Swarm, or D, use ECS service. I can't see it. Okay. A, use backlog per instance metric with target tracking scaling policy. If you use a target tracking scaling policy based on a custom Amazon SQS queue metric, dynamic scaling can adjust to the demand curve of your application more effectively. A firm runs its technology operations on a fleet of Amazon EC2 instances. The firm needs a certain software to be available on the instances to support their daily workflows. The developer team has been told to use the user data feature of EC2 instances. Which of the following, how do I shrink this guy? I don't know. Which of the following are true about the user data EC2 configuration? Select two. A, by default, user data runs only during the boot cycle when you first launch an instance. B, by default, scripts entered as user data don't have root privileges for executing. C, by default, scripts entered as user data are executed with root user privileges. D, by default, user data is executed every time an EC2 instance is restated. E, when an instance is running, you can update user data by using root user credentials. And it's A and C. By default, user data runs only during the boot cycle when you first launch an instance. Okay. By default, scripts entered as user data are executed with root user privileges. Okay. As a senior developer, you are tasked with creating several API gateway-powered APIs along with your team of developers. The developers are working on the API and the development environment, but they find the changes made to the API are not reflected when the API is called. As an associate, which of the following solutions would you recommend for this use case? A, enable Lambda authorizer to access API. B, redeploy the API to an existing stage or to a new stage. C, use stage variables for development state of API. D, developers need IAM permissions on API execution component of API gateway. All right, B, redeploy the API to an existing stage or to a new stage. After creating your API, you must deploy it to make it callable by your users. Okay, and you have to have the stage. You have to associate it with a stage. Okay, a media company uses Amazon SQS queue to manage their transactions. With changing business needs, the payload size of the messages is increasing. The team lead of the project is worried about the 256 kilobyte message size limit that SQS has. What can be done to make the queue accept messages of a larger size? A, use gzip compression. B, use the multi-part API. C, get a service limit increase from AWS. D, use the SQS extended client. D, use the SQS extended client. Okay. You are a developer working with the AWS CLI to create Lambda functions that contain environment variables. Your functions will require over 50 environment variables consisting of sensitive information of database table names. What is the total set size number of environment variables you can create for AWS Lambda? A, the total size of all environment variables shouldn't exceed 4 kilobytes. The maximum number of variables that can be created is 35. The total size of all environment variables shouldn't exceed 8 kilobytes. There's no limit on the number of variables. C, the total size of all environment variables shouldn't exceed 4 kilobytes. There's no limit on the number of variables. D, the total size of all environment variables shouldn't exceed 8 kilobytes. The maximum number of variables that can be created is 50. Okay. C, the total size of all environment variables shouldn't exceed 4 kilobytes. There's no limit on the number of variables. Okay. I'm trying to stop the recording.